Well, hi, everybody. Welcome to another very, very important video from GW Center for Integrative Medicine. We have a very, very special event for everybody today. I'm going to talk about it in just a second, but as you know, please do subscribe to the channel if you find that this video is helpful for you. It helps the channel, but more importantly, it gives you the access to the updated videos right away. You will be able to see them even before everybody else does, and you're never going to miss anything that's up to date. So today we have a tribute. We actually have not had a lot of tributes on this channel. I think we've had one to one of my absolutely dearest patients who has passed very recently. Bernard Burt, and I'll say a few words about him, but before that, let me introduce our guests today. So we have Jeffrey Burt, who's the Bernie's nephew, and who's been together with me in the last few years. We've really tried to make Bernie's life as good as we could. But Jeff is very, very highly accomplished, internationally recognized lawyer who got his education from Princeton. He has worked in a variety of different things. After coming to Princeton from Montgomery Blair Senior High School in Maryland, he studied at the Woodward Wilson School and was business editor and advertising manager to the Prince, president of Omicron Delta Epsilon Honor Society, and active in all kinds of parts of the university life. Then he went on to Yale Law, and he clerked for a federal appellate judge in Baltimore and spent almost his entire career as a partner at the international law firm Arnold and Porter. Interestingly, Jeff, I didn't know that because, as life has it, you and I didn't talk a lot about ourselves. It was Bernie. I didn't realize you had a very close involvement with Soviet Union. I think you mentioned it a few times, but we never kind of talked about it. Plus, I don't necessarily remember much of my upbringing in a very positive light, as you can imagine. Hence, I'm here.
I founded the Moscow office of our firm in 1989.
In 1989.
And also worked with Gorbachev on a few projects. So I go back to the beginning.
You go back. You go back. We could theoretically have met because I left Moscow in 1992 to Israel first and then to Americas. But we could have, of course, I was not planning to be doing anything what I'm doing now. So that's Jeff. And then our second guest, Mary Bemis, is a founder of Insider Guide to Spas and one of the most recognized names in the spa and wellness journalism. She was one of the first reporters to focus on spa and wellness back in the 1990s and forged a vocabulary for spa reportage. Did I say that right? Reportage?
Yes.
That is widely used by those who cover the issue today. She was recently honored as a top 30 influential voice transforming wellness in 2023 by Medical Life. Mary is an inaugural honoree of a Folio Top Women in Media Award. In 1997, she launched an American Spa magazine. In 2007, she co-founded Organic Spa magazine, and I think that is one of we're going to talk about all of that, of course, in detail, but one of the most detailed tributes is in one of the Mary's publications to Bernie's life. We'll talk about that. And she's a founding board member and symposium chair emeritus of the Washington Spa Alliance, WSPA, and Mary has visited and written about thousands of spas in her career, and she worked to build awareness for the industry that she loves through her leadership and mentoring, and of course, she had worked for many years with Bernie, and that's what we're going to talk. So without further ado, let me just say a couple of words about sort of how I see Bernie, and particularly since this podcast is not just for his tribute, but also to really highlight some of the critical aspects of, I think, what made his life so long and so robust and so amazing. Which is, his passion in his life and his passion to the to the health, his passion to the health and wellness through the spa development that he was engaged in. As since I'm a geriatrician, unfortunately, most of my patients come to me when they're a bit older, so I don't get to know them when they were many, many decades prior. And of course, Jeff, you're gonna give us a good view of Bernie's life when he was younger and much more prolific physically. But I met him when he was prolific in his wisdom, when he was still prolific in his passion. And every visit he would have with me, and we met quite often, he wouldn't start with anything medical. Like he almost never it was always asking me how I'm doing, but then more importantly, he would start talking about something new in the spa world. And we always had a little bit of a chat. I would tell him what's new in integrative medicine world. So there was always almost like a professional connection and that passion in both of us to sort of keep everybody around us as healthy as possible. I think what connected us so profoundly and deeply. And I'm honored. I think I'm really honored that I had an opportunity to make his last years, I think, palatable. We'll, in my field, I see when things don't go well sometimes. And I think, Jeff, particularly was all of kind of your compassion and your capacity to support him. I think we did a good job. I think he moved on peacefully, surrounded by love and finishing everything he had to finish. So I think that's all I need to say. But I have a first question to both of you. You knew Bernie intimately well. He was an absolutely amazing human being. As a I can only imagine what he was as a colleague and a member of the family. But let's start there, Jeff. Who was Bernie as a family member? Because that's one aspect I've never seen.
Let me just introduce Bernie's early background, and then I can respond, because I, of course, was his nephew. I was 15 years younger than he was, and his older brother, my father, was 15 years older than he was. So there was an important sort of connection. He was young enough to be a member of my family, but of course, so he was a member of our family. He never married, as you know. So he was very independent. And my mother and father were very close to him. And indeed, when he moved to Washington in the 60s, he actually lived for a while at their home. I should add that his father, my grandfather, were among the wave of immigrants that came from Kiev, and his wife came from Odessa. They met later. On the trip over, the father was 12 years old, one of 5 children, and the ship they were on sank off Newfoundland, literally sank. His father was a baker. Everything was lost. Literally, when they arrived here in the U.S., he was with his father, who was a baker. They had nothing, and he was 12 years old. His father started as a peddler on the streets of Philadelphia, and were always poor. They worked their way up, as happened for that generation. But finally, they could buy a little store in a poor section of Philadelphia. In fact, my father, who was 15 years older, didn't have an indoor bathroom until he was 10. So that's where they raised. Bernie came along in 1929, the 4th child, and was kind of an only child. And indeed, his parents were busy with their grocery store. So he grew up in a poor section, delivered groceries for this family. And indeed, you may recall, he had a lung ailment that developed late in life. And he thinks it was because his teeth were broken when he was a young teenager delivering groceries. And he thinks he got a rib injury, a breakage or a sprain that came back later in his 60s and 70s. We went to a lung doctor at GW, as you recall, because he was having some medical problems. In any event, when he in high school, he did well in high school, but he couldn't afford to go to college and decided to, and there was the Korean War. So he started his post-high school as a private. He later became a sergeant for 2 years. The Korean War, he never saw action. He was assigned to Spokane, Washington State, where there was a SAC base, Strategic Air Command. And he ended up, because of his talents, to be in charge of the newspaper there. When he left in 1952, he then went back to Philadelphia and was one of the early staff people on the TV Guide for 2 years. And that got him involved in public relations. He then went on to a Philadelphia Museum in its early days and became kind of the PR guy, the cultural person in charge. He ended up coming to Washington in the 60s to work for the Smithsonian, and then spent 10 years at the what's the name of the not the Wolfgang, the big open air theater outside of Washington. I'm having a senior moment. I apologize.
Trap Wolf.
To me. Pardon?
Wolf Trap.
Wolf Trap. Well, Wolf Trap, and it was the opening. And he became very close to the founder and the financier of the theater there in Virginia. Among other things, fire. Before they could open, they had a big fire, and he had to handle that for like 2 or 3 years. In any event, and he moved to his home near the Kennedy Cultural Center and had the advantage of that, and became early involved in music and cultural events. When in the 70s, the Wolf Trap no longer, and he parted on very friendly terms, went to work for an advertising agency for a year or two, and then became interested in the spa industry, really. It's almost like a second career. As you know,
You know what spiked his interest?
Pardon?
You know what spiked his interest?
In the spa industry, well, he was interested in travel, and he had some health problems. Was a little overweight, and I don't know how he ended up visiting a spa. As you know, he did write the first. Well, he became a travel writer, and it was sort of a natural thing because of culture. And voters at that time wanted to do a piece on healthy. What was the first volume? It was called Healthy Places.
Healthy Escapes. Voters' Healthy Escapes.
Healthy Escapes. That was the title of it. That was his first book, and the first time and this was when suddenly spas were becoming popular, because, as you know, I mean, in the 60s and 70s, right, there weren't many spas around. Am I correct, Mary? It was kind of a new thing on the market.
There were spas that were referred to as fat farms and health farms for ladies who lunch and this sort of thing, but it really became an American business in the late 80s. It really started picking up with day spas.
Okay, so I think Healthy Places, and also with his own just trying to lose weight and become healthier, and what enamored him, what really excited him, was the fact that spas weren't a place simply to lose weight. They were a way to become healthy. And he had to, it was just kind of an inspiration, very smart man. He also liked the people he met in the spa industry. As I mentioned, he developed a close relationship with the founder of the Wolf Trap Farm. And he liked the cross-generational thing. I think the people that were in the spa industry were a little older than he, an older generation, and his personality made him a wonderful companion, and he adapted well to that kind of environment. And Mary, let me then turn it over to you because this is when you first intersected with Bernie and can tell more about why the spa industry captured his whole life. It was his whole life.
It's interesting. So just a few things in reference to what you were saying. So around 1991 is when the International Spa Association officially was launched, and Bernie had everything to do with that. The seed was in his head. He brought people together. It was a great time. Spas were just starting to pick up in this country, really spurred by day spas and whatnot. There were a few destination spas. I'm going to be a bit all over the place, so pull me back in, Mikhail, if you must.
Okay,
But I'm going to do so chronologically. 1991, the International Spa Association was founded. I believe it was 1998 that he published Fodor's Healthy Escapes. 2001, he published the book that I don't know how many printings, 3-4 printings, which was 100 Best Spas of the World. And he co-authored that with Pamela Price. Then fast forward to 2010, and we launched the Washington Spa Alliance, which lasted about 7 years. It was a fabulous DC-based group that was really wanting to merge what we called spa care with health care in this country. Sadly, that has not happened yet, but put that aside for now. So, you know, Bernie was so many things. It's hard to talk about him in few words because he really captured and he represented everything that true spa is to me and to those who really know that spa is much more than a treatment or a vacation or whatever. So he had a tremendous ability in what you're saying, Jeffrey. It really, came on, what is the word I want? It melded into the spa. Everything you're saying, he brought into spa with him. He was a fabulous communicator. He loved people. He loved connecting people. He was a connector. He was a communicator. And most of all, he was super curious. And curiosity will keep us alive. It may have killed the cat, but it will keep us alive.
Well, I truly believe,
And
that it kept him alive way longer than his biologic determinant, because
yeah,
Jeff and I knew he was really sick in the last couple of years. He had the list of his problems and the number of medications. But like, you talk to him and only in the last few months you could see that his energy dropped. But before that, no matter how sick he was feeling, there was this complete engagement and curiosity. No matter, like, he would come in like puffing and huffing, and I'm like, can you talk? He's like, forget it. We talk about this. And next thing I know, like, hour went somewhere. We didn't even do his medical part.
Yeah, and up until I wanted to talk about the trip to Prato. The last time I saw him alive was a year before he passed, which is really very, very odd, but very sentimental, special for me. We met in Prato in South Tyrol for his last hurrah. It was his last grand spa trip, and he was going to go come hell or high water. And I know, Mikhail, you were one of the doctors that said go, and his cardiologist did not want to go, and with good reason. His family was extraordinarily worried to put this man. I hadn't seen him since 2021, where we had lunch at his favorite place in DC, Jeffrey, the restaurant on the water. I can't remember, Viola Mare, one of these places. Anyway, so I arrived, I think a day earlier. I was in the lunch area. I walked into the lunch area, and there is Bernie. There he is, eating his healthy spa lunch. I'm like, Bernie, we were reunited. And he's in a wheelchair. It was the first time I had seen him in a wheelchair. I was not aware that he had lost so much mobility, but he was happy. That man was happy. His appetite was fabulous. He was eating really well. And the funny story, one of the funny stories from that trip is when we first got there, destination spa, they hook you up to a machine that tells your biological age. Mikhail, you may know these things. And they put these sensors on you. Well, Bernie, we both did it, individually, independently. And we were going to compare notes at another lunch. Bernie's beaming. His biological age at 93 is 45. He's 45. And he said, I feel like a new man. I'm a new person. I'm so glad I came. This is wonderful. His biological age was 45. Well, they wouldn't tell me my biological age because I was so stressed out. My results were so terrible. They refused to tell me. I was probably 93. So Bernie and he didn't lord it over me, but I kept saying, Bernie, you're doing a lot better than I am. Anyway, we had a fabulous.
Let me interrupt you for a second. I'm just going to do something really crazy here. So you guys, are you seeing his photo?
No, I'm seeing my part of my bio.
Okay, sorry, that's not what's supposed to be meant. Let's do this. How about now?
Yes, I see his. That's the
So
photo
this is
dinner.
when you saw him in Praedhof.
Yes.
I think reading a menu before ordering the lunch or something.
No,
No?
no, I must correct you because
Sure.
this is what we're talking about. Bernie was reading the daily news of everything, the daily news of the resort, of all the adventures and experiences and fitness classes and menu. This is what he was reading, what he could look forward to the next day. He was going to pick out what he was going to do. And he was very curious always about what was on offer.
Yeah.
So Bernie was Bernie until the very end. Bernie was Bernie. And in the industry, he was cantankerous. He was not an easy guy. If he didn't like something, he made it known. And so what? That's
And one
fabulous.
thing, a week before that picture was taken, we were with Dr. Kogan. Bernie, he was in a wheelchair there, couldn't walk. He was having great difficulty, really almost staying awake. And this is just a week before. And not surprisingly, my wife and I were trying to convince him not to go. When we said he would have to go alone, because we couldn't afford, we didn't have anybody to go with him. But he not only insisted on going, but first he said, well, I'm going to a medical facility. It turned out it wasn't quite a medical facility, trying to convince Dr. Kogan this wasn't a normal investigation. This was a medical
doctor on.
And this is a man who had
his ways to convince.
And finally, he figured the only way he could convince him is this man who had to be wheeled in, got up from his wheelchair and began, going on independently. He was just going to leave there and walk out. Fortunately, we prevented him from walking home that day. But this determination, and when we saw that picture as well, and I circulated it around while he was still in Italy because
I sent it to you to let you know that he was doing okay.
Exactly. Okay. I didn't realize you had sent it. And I showed it to Dr. Kogan at the time. And frankly, the family was relieved to know, one, he was alive, and two, that he was enjoying himself. So.
Oh, he enjoyed himself. He really did. And just on the last editorial note, another editorial note is he was writing for me to the very end. I had assigned a male's grooming column for him, a male grooming column. And he was so excited about it. He found a new voice. He was playing around with the tone and voice of this. He loved it. Another thing, when he was in the assisted living place for nursing home, I remember when he went in, well, we remember a lot of things. He wasn't very happy, but one of the things about having to go, but then he sort of knew it was best for him. But what struck me was that he wanted fresh food, as he should have, as everybody should have. He wanted fresh food. That's what he wanted. That was his first thing. Wasn't like, get me out of here, blah, blah, I don't want to be here, blah, blah. No, it was, I want my fresh food. I'm trying to tell them that they need to have fresh food.
I had institutional, and indeed during that time, he said he was going to write a piece and have it
because
published
I assigned a piece to him
about what it's like at these institutional, because he wanted to change the whole program for senior people from an inside view. And I said to him, you're going to live here. It's a very nice facility. I won't mention it was, but if you're very highly critical, they may not like what they see published.
Cantankerous side of him.
Well, also you can imagine how they would treat him if he did what would be a truthful account of institutional food. So he was going to change the industry for geriatric care. That was his next project.
The head nurse there, I could totally sense it. She loved him, but she was like, we got like, chill him a little. He's a little too pushy there. Had a few conversations with him. Mary, how old was he when you gave him the column about grooming him in?
Oh, I think that was maybe 2019.
So he was basically like 90 almost.
Yeah,
Yeah,
89
and
years.
I wanted him to write about male grooming at his age, shaving and what products did he like? And he loved products. He loved skincare products.
Huh.
He did.
Wow. So, so this is the sort of the wisdom I think here. I think when I was with him, it was obvious that the one of the most striking feature that I think what really kept him alive was that he was so passionate about communicating this knowledge he had and his own passion to say, look, we have a complete right and we should have access to healthy living. This was his way of communicating and pulling it out there. And I love that, a lot of times when people don't feel well, they will shy away from talking about it. They will shy away and they will just concentrate on what is in front of them, on being sick. He never did that. In fact, I always had to drive back the same message saying, look, I got to ask you questions. This is not all social events, you and I need to know how to take care of you. He was always nonstop. Like I usually gotten in the last year, I got into the habit, since I always have trainees with me, I would have if the Bernie was on a schedule, the habit was I would send somebody in, not for them to collect information. I actually didn't really need that, but for him to teach them. And I would say, look, this guy is going to tell you a story. Please listen to it. He has a lot of wisdom. Students loved it because they were getting this information that they couldn't get anywhere else. That's who he was. I mean, he would be sitting there breathing heavily and still talking about the talk.
Yeah, he loved it. He loved to educate. And you said your students, I went back to his 100 Best Spas of the World book with Pam Price. And what struck me after all these years was his inscription. And his inscription was with appreciation to the caregivers uniting body and soul with energy from the heart. That's Bernie. Yes, he wanted to educate the consumer about the health and wellness and how to best take care of yourself, but he had a real he knew. He just knew. That this is back in 2000 and whatever, one, and he's this is him. So it was a 360. He had a 360 view and care of from beginning to end what makes a spa, what's the spa experience from the service provider to the end, to the consumer, to the whole thing. Anyway, very unique man, and I think misunderstood too, Jeffrey, in the industry. I think a lot of people they misunderstood him. And, I think people in general are, I don't want to say a bit suspicious, but when somebody is very passionate, people tend to, there's something wrong with that person. You're not supposed to be that passionate, you're not, tone it down. But that's a wonderful thing about him. He followed his heart. He did what he wanted to do. At Pradelhoff, he spoke a lot, Jeffrey, to your earlier comments. He spoke a lot about his time in the Air Force. He really, really wanted to talk about that. He talked a lot about his beginnings with the museum. He loved it. I think those were some of his happiest times. He loved art and culture. And again, like with Spa, he loved turning people of all generations onto that. And, Bernie was a lover of beauty in all forms, of beauty and health, and he had a unique way of being and looking at things, and it turned some people off, and whatever, so what? In the industry, that's what I'm saying. So he was his own person, which frightens people, but he was his own person.
Well, I think he saw the spa industry not as the spa industry as I would conceive it. Rich people interested in losing weight and it's pure vanity. He saw it as a important ingredient to live well.
Which
And
is
that was
why
very important to eat the right. And he was very concerned. And indeed, he really did want to take on the nursing home industry and the assisted living facility, to say, how can you possibly feed this kind of food, feed this to people? That's not the right kind of food. Why don't you give this a priority? He also was very concerned about details. So, for example, he had to go to a rehabilitation a place for 2 months. And he was very upset because from the hospital, they just dumped him in this place. Nobody introduced him. There wasn't anybody, a greeting committee. Nobody kind of explained. They just did what they do to people from hospitals to rehabilitation centers. They just wheel him in and dump them. And he felt that was outrageous. And he cared about these things.
Right. Yeah.
And I told the nursing home people where he was, you're going to have a problem here because he would like to treat this like it's a spa facility and be treated accordingly. And they didn't know what we were talking about. What do you mean?
Can only imagine what their initial reactions were, knowing him. Yeah.
Well, he left behind a wonderful legacy. He really did. And it was my absolute pleasure to write his, what do you call it, a memorial. I mean, it was wonderful to hear from a lot of the leaders in the industry who are still here. And the one that really changed his life passed away a few years ago, and that was Mel Zuckerman from Canyon Ranch. And he is the one who Bernie always gave credit to for turning his life around, losing the weight, making him realize,
Wait,
the big light.
So he went to Canyon Ranch when all of this happened?
Yes, and this was in the very beginning. I don't know what year, but it must have been when he was doing the Fodor's reseach.
Right.
Is that the one? Which Canyon Ranch did you go to? The one in Massachusetts?
The original one, the first, the mothership in Canyon Ranch in Arizona.
Tucson. Yeah. That's actually where I did a rotation with Andrew Weil back in 2003, and this is the first time I seen that Canyon Ranch, because they took us over as an example of what could be achieved in a medical spa. So I very vividly remember that. So, and actually that's what back in 2003, because I grew up in Soviet Union, and we had the whole system in place of what's called sanatoriums, which was basically, it was fascinating that back in the day, some parts of the Europe had this really effective model. You don't go, like now we send patients to rehabs, which honestly, I can be a little critical. It's my own field. It's okay. Most of them are not a place of healing. I'm telling you that. They look like very sanitized facilities where patients are pushed to do some physical therapy, but the rest is a nightmarish, And sanatoriums were really the spas. There were spas, and a lot of the things that were done in there were like very, like the holistic approaches on another level. And I don't know if I'm assuming, Mary, he traveled a lot to Europe and learned a ton of those things, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, so that's what I think I remember when he was teaching me some of this stuff. It triggered that whole layer when I was way before I went to medical school. I remember those things because I actually visited a few.
In your DNA, it's in your DNA. And it's
probably in his DNA, because he grew up there. So of course he didn't experience anything there, but
yeah. Well, he was a big believer. He knew about the power of spa. And thanks to COVID, I hate to say thanks to COVID, but the term self-care, which I kind of like. I like it because the consumer understands it. Everybody understands what that means now. And it makes me happy because it's all spa to me. It's all spa to me. It's common sense and it's spa. And I'm really happy that in this country we have returned to there's a big return to the waters, which also made Bernie very happy. All of the, the hot springs and all these places that are being bought up and rebuilt, and the hope was always to have more of a European model in this country. And I think slowly but surely, as far as a spa, a true medical based more on a European model than a medical spa here where you have Botox and all of this stuff done to you. But I think I'm hopeful that we'll see that within the next 10 years. We'll see a really good model. It has to happen with everything. We're going in that
I mean,
direction.
look, we just had a death on campus. We had a resident who killed himself.
Oh,
No?
And, you know, medical field, medical training is a toxic environment.
absolutely.
How
I was just
can we expect the physician trained in a toxic environment become true healers? It's a hypocritical. I mean, it's completely counterintuitive. We trained a generation of docs who are all about efficiency and revenue generating, and you know, you can be an amazing physician, a great proceduralist, a great surgeon, whatever, but if that whole healing environment is not supported by infrastructure, we're never going to get anywhere. We will always be the last developed country in the world about all the health outcomes as we are today. And he saw all this, he knew all this, and he was very aggressive at saying, look, those two have to. And that's actually was the bulk of our conversation. He kept on trying to dig out of me the way to communicate this ideas that he had to a broader community. You know, of course, I'm in trenches. It's hard for me to sort of philosophically think through this in the time and logistics or restrictions of what I have. But I think his ideas are exactly right. I think really integrating the spa not as a standalone, oh, you know, reach only, go and have a foot massage, but like an essential part of recovery, essential part of healing when the level of care does not need to be the hospital level, but you know something is off, you know you need more. And you know, we're I think there's so much opportunities here, and I'm glad, Mary, to hear that you think that the our
I
positive.
we don't have a choice. I mean, it has to happen and it will happen with there's more emphasis on community. There's more emphasis on bathhouses. There's more emphasis on, you know, social saunas and Aufguss and all of this. And why? Because we're finally realizing we have to make it more accessible. I'm tired of hearing the word democratize, because the industry has been saying we must democratize spa or we must democratize wellness for the past 15 years. And not a lot of movement has happened. It just hasn't. So COVID did put the halo back around spa and wellness. And you know, people now, I think more people know that their health is truly in their own hands. I think people realize that more than ever before. You know, it's interesting to
I mean,
see.
U.S. government is not going to be giving us our health back.
Exactly. And I feel more hopeful than I have in many years that the healthcare industry and the spa care industry will be able to work together somehow. It's happening. It's slowly happening. I am hopeful. I really am.
So I think we're getting close. We're going to wrap up in the next couple of minutes. Jeff, you've been quiet lately. Tell us tell us an anecdote about him that stands out that would be very vivid.
Okay. Well, there are two, and it's related. I spent in the last year, of course, a lot of time with them because all his contemporaries, you know, were gone. And the life of someone who's in his final period of months is a very lonely one. And he remarked that he was lonely. And he said one of the things that he played over and over again in his mind, and he told me many times, he never thought about dying. It was never part of his psychology. His wonderful cardiologist had said some time ago, after he had some heart valve issues, that he'd live to be 100. And that was his target. And he thought he would live to be 100, and perhaps he might have. And he said, I just never thought about it. And one of the things I think if he had lived that he might have included in his resume is how to turn the experience of nursing home and assisted living into how to become better, how to improve, how to become well. And one of the things I'll always remember in terms of an incident is he was fighting until the end. He was going to physical therapy twice a week. He didn't want to think about dying because he didn't want to die. And he devoted all his energy. And when I saw him from a distance with his physical therapist, where he would have to sort of get out of his wheelchair, which was extremely difficult, he used all his energy. Finally, when he started hospice, which was very good hospice, and this was in late October, he said to a new nurse who came in just to introduce herself to, that was the beginning of hospice care, and he said, am I going to get better? And I was there in the room in this first meeting, and I said, and he really wanted to know because he felt maybe he could get better, which means that he'd be able to walk, and he was, you know, the usual handicaps of being in a wheelchair all the time and being in bed almost all the time. And this nurse who's experienced, she'd been there for 20 years. And I was interested in what she'd say because when he would talk to me about it, I would say, well, it depends. And you've got to, you know, who knows, and avoid the ultimate question, am I going to get better? And she said to him, no. She said, no, you're not going to get better. This was 3 weeks before he died, because after that exchange, when this nurse, very experienced, said, you're not going to get better, it not only deflated him, but as you would expect, it happened to you as well. He just figured, well, if he's not going to get better, what's the point of it? And I think that he would have worked on that issue. The food issue is very important, as we talked earlier, because food is very important for all of us. And the quality of food at these institutions is just very, very poor. So he would have Uber and other things bring him food to help with this situation. But his orientation all his life was how to heal, how to get better, how to have more enrichment in your life. And that was a challenge, which is, all of you know, is not handled well for people at end stages. And I think he would have wrestled with it and maybe come up with some proposals to think how you could make wellness a little more of a goal, and have a program that doesn't tell people, no, you're not going to get better, because healing was his life, and getting better, having enrichment. And when that was removed from the agenda, it did deflate him and cost him some months. I don't know how much longer he would have lived absent that conversation. So.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think I mean, at that point, he was also so frail. Like, you know, his attempt at trying to recondition. I remember getting a message from physical therapy who basically was saying, I mean, his soul is aggressive and pushing, but his body is not.
Yeah, he couldn't breathe.
Yeah.
He was on oxygen at that point.
Yeah. Well, thank you both so much. I do want to point out that this is one of the cases that we're definitely gonna go into my next book, the book where I would describe cases of exceptional humans that I met on my path, who helped me to understand why we live the way we live and why we live longer despite the challenges. I think he had a lot of challenges healthcare wise. He overcome all of them, and he lived not just exceptionally long life for the types of problems he had. And also, like, I did know some of this history when he was growing up. Some, you know, he had more healthcare challenges and more traumas and more than probably most people in their entire lifespan. And yet it didn't block him. It didn't make him not get there, you know, not to get to the ninth decade and be productive and happy, you know. And despite all the physical challenges, he kept on going. You know, he really, as you said, he just stopped in the last few weeks, you know, and that's
very abruptly.
That's a
Can
great.
I ask one question? Now, when Mary, who was a great addition to his life, let the world know it was passing, there must have been 50 unbelievable responses. There needs somebody Facebook, and you shared it with us. And I very much like to share, if I can, and not violate the copyright laws, that section that you share with Bernie, because it'll mean a lot to a lot of people to see this write-up, and maybe they'll buy the book as well, just to be able to share that, because he had an incredible network of friends and people who, I couldn't believe all the eulogies that came out as a result, Mary, of your effort. It was incredible.
It's my absolute pleasure. Mm.
Well, thank you both so much for coming
Thank
again.
you.
If
Thank you.
You. But Bernie would have been very happy, and maybe he
yes,
is.
I think
Who knows
so. I
about it?
think Bernie is happy right now listening
Yes.
to this. I have a strong feeling about it. It's such a great
Yes.
book.
Yes.
Thank you both for coming. I will make sure that the links to Mary's article are there. I'll also make sure I'll find some other things to post about. I think I'll put the link to Bernie's books as well from Amazon. I'm sure that I'll be able to
That's great.
figure
Yeah.
this all out, and I'll see you all around. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thank you for what you did for Bernie, Doctor.
Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course.